I came home that evening with the steady ache in my hands that had followed me for weeks. The tremor was worse after a full shift at the library. Shelving returns and answering questions I could no longer hear clearly. I set my bag down on the counter and told Lena, as gently as I could, that I was thinking of stepping away from work. My health wasn't what it had been, and I wanted to rest before the exhaustion carried me into something I couldn't climb back from. She froze in the middle of the kitchen, arms crossed. Jaw set. "If you don't pay, you don't live here," she said. The words landed like a blow, harder than anything I'd felt in years. I tried to laugh it off, but her eyes didn't soften. Evan walked in from the dining room, laptop still open in his hands. "We've actually been working on this," he said, sliding a spreadsheet across the table. Rows and columns detailed utilities, groceries, internet, even property taxes. He had divided everything by 3 adults and 2 children, arriving at a neat figure beside my name. I stared at the numbers. Hearing only the hum of the refrigerator, Lena tapped the page with her finger. "This is fair. Everyone contributes, or the whole system falls apart." The house I had owned for nearly 40 years had become a line item on a balance sheet. I wanted to remind her of the sacrifices that built these walls, of the nights her father came home reeking of salt and diesel from the docks, of the pennies I stretched to keep her in new shoes. Instead, I folded the paper carefully, slipped it into my bag, and said nothing, already knowing I would not sleep that night. That night, when the house grew still, I slipped on my coat and walked toward the locks. The sidewalks glistened from a light rain, and the air carried that sharp brine from the sound. Each step echoed Lena's voice in my head, "If you don't pay, you don't live here." I had thought I'd raised her to understand that a home was more than dollars on a ledger. At the railing, I watched the dark water rise and fall against the gates. Callum used to bring me here on Sunday evenings, back when we were still saving every penny to buy the Ballard house. He'd point at the fishing boats waiting their turn and tell me we'd earn our place too, steady and patient, no matter how long it took. We signed the deed in 1984, a modest 2-story on a quiet street. Paid with sweat from his tugboat shifts and my hours sorting shelves at the library. It was the proudest moment of our lives. I remembered painting Lena's bedroom sky blue, Callum steadying the ladder while she spun in circles on the floor. Too young to know what it had cost us. The house was meant to give her a foundation, not a weapon. The gulls cried overhead, pulling me back. My breath fogged in the air, and I realized I couldn't keep drifting through the days, letting others dictate how I existed under my own roof. Silence had kept the peace, but silence had also erased me. Standing by the water, I made a quiet vow I would draw the line, even if it meant changing everything about the life I thought I'd keep until the end. I turned back toward home, already knowing the first thing I would do in the morning. The next morning, I climbed into the attic, where the air always smelled of dust and cedar. Boxes lined the narrow beams, labeled in Callum's hand, boat logs, receipts, taxes. I pulled out the carton marked house papers and set it on the floorboards. Inside were the records of a life lived frugally, mortgage slips, savings bonds, faded bank statements. Each slip was proof of nights when we had chosen beans and rice so Lena could have new sneakers for gym class. I remembered the winter of '87 when Callum worked double shifts on the tugboats during the longshoremen's strike. He'd come home hollow-eyed, his knuckles cracked from rope burns, and collapse into the chair while I laid out the small meals I'd pieced together from coupons. I took sewing jobs on the side then, patching uniforms, hemming dresses, anything that brought in a few extra dollars. The Singer machine rattled into the night while Lena slept, unaware that every stitch was buying her field trip tickets and school photos. We did it without complaint because we believed it mattered. And it did. The Ballard house was proof of our endurance. The roof that sheltered every birthday, every scraped knee, every late-night fever. Tucked beneath the mortgage receipts was the envelope Callum prepared before his health gave way. A trust document with my name as sole trustee. Bonds that had matured. A certificate of deposit. The house deed itself clear of debt since 2014. He had ensured that I would never be beholden to anyone. Not even our daughter. Yet, as I glanced downstairs, I heard Lena's voice with its sharp edge, pushing for rent as though none of this history existed. I knew she carried burdens too. Student loans that never quite shrank, rising tuition for Milo's school, daycare costs for Aria, the new lease Evan had signed on a car they didn't need. She had convinced herself I was part of their problem, a body in the house consuming resources, rather than the woman who had given everything so they could stand upright. I smoothed the edges of the trust papers and placed them back in the folder. The truth was simple. The sacrifices we made were written in ink. Even if Lena had forgotten to read them. I carried the box down from the attic, resolved to keep it close. Soon, I would need every line inside it. Saturday morning smelled of coffee and buttered toast when Lena slid a stack of papers across the counter. She had highlighted sections in yellow, bold headings for household contribution agreement. Her tone was brisk, professional, as if I were a client at her firm rather than her mother. I drafted this to make things clear. She said, $900 a month covers utilities, groceries, and part of the property tax. It keeps everything fair. Evan stood nearby, arms folded, nodding along. This way there's no confusion. Everyone knows their share. I picked up the first page and saw lines for my signature. Spaces that would make me a tenant in the home Callum and I had scraped to buy. Before I could respond, Aria wandered in wearing her pajamas, hair tangled from sleep. She leaned on the counter and peered at the paper. "Why does Grandma have to pay for Grandma's house?" she asked. Her voice curious, not accusing. The silence that followed pressed heavier than any argument. Lena's cheeks flushed. Evan cleared his throat, and I folded the contract neatly before setting it down. "I'll need some time to look it over," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It's important I understand what I'm agreeing to." Lena exhaled sharply. "It's not complicated. Mom, it's just fairness." "Even so," I replied. "I want to take my time." I carried the papers upstairs, tucked them in my desk drawer, and sat for a long moment staring at Callum's old fountain pen resting beside them. Then I opened my phone and typed a short message to Hannah Coe, the realtor whose number I had saved months earlier. "Call me Monday morning." Subject house next door. I pressed send, closed the drawer, and went downstairs to refill my coffee as if nothing had happened. Already charting a different course. Monday morning, I walked down Ballard Avenue, past the brick storefronts and old timber beams, until I reached Hannah Coe's office. She greeted me with a warm smile, the kind that carried more patience than most people offer these days, and ushered me into a chair by the window. "I got your message," she said, opening her laptop. "You're ready to sell." I shook my head. "Not sell. I want to buy. The house next door to mine, Becker's place. I want it in my name. No financing. As soon as possible." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Then she leaned forward. "You're serious?" I pulled an envelope from my bag and slid it across the table. Inside were the statements from the CD Callum had set up before he passed, now fully matured, along with the municipal bonds we'd held for decades. Proof of funds, clear as daylight. "I can cover a cash offer," I said. "Inspection is fine, but I'll waive appraisal. I want a clean deal and a quick close." Hannah glanced through the papers, her expression shifting from surprise to admiration. "This is more than enough. With terms like that, you'll get their attention." I sat straighter, the weight in my chest easing for the first time in days. This wasn't about spite. It was about standing on my own ground again, even if it was just across the hedge. Hannah typed quickly, drafting the outline of an offer. Will request a 5-day inspection contingency. 2 weeks to close. Cash talks louder than anything else right now. I nodded. Good. Let's make it happen. When I left her office, the drizzle had stopped, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the ground solid beneath my feet as I turned toward home, knowing the next step would change everything. The following afternoon, Hannah walked me through the Becker house. The moment I stepped inside, I caught the faint resin scent of cedar beams. Old, but well kept, reminding me of the boatyard where Callum once worked. Sunlight filtered through the south-facing windows, casting a warm stripe across the hardwood floors. The kitchen was dated, but the bones were strong, and in the backyard, a detached garage hinted at the possibility of an ADU. I could picture Milo stringing lights for a school project out there, Aria drawing with chalk along the walk. This one won't sit long, Hannah said, flipping through the seller's packet. They're asking $775, but if we come in at $800 clean offer, no appraisal, we'll have their attention within the day. I didn't hesitate. Do it. Cash. 2 weeks to close. 5-day inspection. Nothing else. By evening, Hannah called to say the sellers had accepted. Escrow was open. And I had wired earnest money from the credit union. The next step was title review. But I already felt the shift inside me. The ground that had been crumbling beneath my feet was firm again, at home. Lena sat at the dining table with her laptop. Later that night, an email appeared in my inbox. Monthly rent invoice. She had itemized groceries, utilities, and shared household services. I read it twice, then clicked reply. Thank you for the figures. Nothing more. I closed the laptop and went upstairs to read, a calm settling over me. I had no need to argue. The real ledger was already balanced in my favor. Over the next few days, I noticed the strain in Evan's voice whenever the phone buzzed. One evening, as I passed the kitchen, I overheard him whispering about the daycare bill that had jumped again, and the lease payment on the new SUV he'd insisted on last fall. His sentences were clipped, his hand pressed to his forehead, as though each figure was a blow. Lena, tight-lipped, typed furiously at her calculator, papers spread around her like storm debris. They had no idea that while they were tabulating cents, I was securing walls, a roof, and freedom next door. It wasn't triumph I felt so much as clarity. The power had always been mine, hidden in quiet savings, in Callum's foresight, in my own patience. I folded the email into a neat archive and tucked the escrow papers into Callum's old leather folder. There was no need to confront, no need to justify. Soon enough, when the keys were in my hand, the truth would make itself known. And when it did, they would discover that the house they thought contained me no longer defined me at all. Saturday morning carried the same heaviness as the week before, the air thick with the smell of coffee brewing and tension simmering underneath. I sat at the kitchen table, the same seat where Lena had once tossed a spreadsheet across the counter. Evan hovered near the sink with his laptop balanced on one hand, and Lena stood opposite me, a manila folder tucked under her arm. She placed it on the table with a deliberate motion, sliding the papers in front of me as if she were closing a deal. I've updated the agreement, she said. It accounts for groceries, utilities, insurance. It's not a lot. Mom, it's just fair, Evan chimed in, voice measured but firm. This way, there are no misunderstandings. Everyone carries their weight. It keeps peace in the house. I studied the pages, black ink, neat columns, a signature line waiting like a trap. For a long moment, I didn't speak. I thought of Callum's cracked hands guiding the brush across Lena's childhood walls, of the years I sewed until midnight so she could have the extras her classmates took for granted. I thought of the quiet walk to the locks, when I promised myself never again to let silence erase me. Finally, I pushed the papers back toward her. "You're right," I said softly. "I won't live here anymore without contributing." Her shoulders relaxed, a flicker of relief passing over her face. Evan closed his laptop halfway. Satisfied, but I wasn't finished. I reached into my bag and laid a small brass key on the table. Its teeth caught the morning light. I bought the house next door. I said, "The Beckers accepted my offer. Escrow closes in 2 weeks. I'll be moving." The silence that followed was deeper than any argument. Evan blinked, his mouth opening without sound. Lena's face drained of color, her hand trembling against the folder. "You bought it," she stammered. "Yes," I answered. "And since you seem to want formal arrangements, I've drafted one of my own. From the same folder I pulled a single sheet, simple, unadorned. This house remains in my trust. You may stay for now, but under a license agreement I control. 90 days notice. Utilities in your name starting next month, and no assumption of ownership." Evan snatched the paper, scanning it quickly. "You can't, I can," I interrupted. My voice was steady. "This house was never yours. It is not a group asset. You will respect the terms, or you will leave." Lena's eyes filled with something I hadn't seen since she was a girl, fear tangled with shame. She gripped the edge of the table. "Mom, we have the kids. You thought wrong," I said. "You mistook generosity for obligation." At that moment, Milo wandered in, hair tousled, clutching a soccer ball against his chest. He looked from his mother's rigid posture to my calm face, then down at the key glinting between us. "Grandma," he asked, "will you still tuck me in if you live next door?" I reached over and smoothed his hair, the gesture grounding me. "Of course," I said. "All you have to do is knock. I'll always answer." Aria's footsteps padded across the floor, and she slipped her small hand into mine without asking what was happening. Children often sense what adults are too proud to admit. I closed the folder, gathered my things, and stood. The moment had ended. The terms were set. I had not raised my voice, had not begged, had not justified. I had simply chosen the door that was mine to open. And as I walked back to my room, I felt the weight of decades lift, knowing the next chapter of my life would begin one gate, one garden, one porch away. Within weeks, the shift was plain. The first utility bill addressed to Lena arrived in the mail slot, and I heard the sharpness in her voice when she opened it at the counter. Evan tried to mask his frustration, but the crease in his forehead deepened each time another envelope came, without me quietly covering what had always been in my name. The numbers rose higher than either of them had admitted aloud. The new SUV payment still demanded its share, and Milo's after-school program fees weren't shrinking. I saw Evan pacing on the porch one evening, phone pressed to his ear, whispering about deferring something until his bonus came through. Lena stood behind the curtain, calculator in hand, her eyes darting as though the digits might betray her. Neighbors stopped me on my short walks to the store. "Why the move, Noreen?" they asked kindly, glancing between my old porch and my new one. Before I could answer, Lena often interjected. "Mom just needed more space," she'd say, forcing a smile, but her voice cracked. And the neighbors, many of whom had known us for decades, looked unconvinced. Their polite nods couldn't hide the unease. In the afternoons, I began hearing light knocks at my back door. Aria appeared first, backpack slipping off her shoulder, asking if she could do her homework at my kitchen table. A few days later, Milo followed, soccer ball tucked under his arm, saying he wanted to practice in my yard. They didn't ask permission with words, they asked with presence, and I welcomed them inside my smaller, calmer space. Their laughter rose again, free of tension. I set out cookies, reminded them to finish assignments before play, and let them feel at home. Their visits were my quiet reminder that bonds of love run deeper than contracts or invoices. Across the hedge, the house I once claimed alone now bore the weight of bills and expectations. Each light left on, each gallon of water run too long, pressed back against Lena and Evan with a force they hadn't calculated. And as I tucked Aria's pencil case into her bag one evening, I knew a harder conversation was still waiting, one that would test whether my daughter could face the truth she had tried so long to avoid. It was nearly dusk when I heard the knock on my door. Lena stood there alone, shoulders slumped, eyes rimmed red. She stepped inside without the practiced confidence she usually carried, her hands twisting together as if she were afraid to let go. "I thought I was protecting us," she whispered, staring at the floor. "I told myself it was care, but really it was control. I didn't want to see it until now." Her voice cracked, and for the first time in years she looked like the girl I used to braid hair for before school, vulnerable and unsure. I led her to the table and waited. "I don't want to lose you," she said finally. "Tell me how to make this right." I slid a folder toward her, plain, unthreatening. Inside was a draft lease, 6 months at a below-market rate. But paired with terms of respect, no more jokes about rent, no unilateral decisions, shared spaces by agreement only. "This is the line," I said quietly. "Cross it, and the arrangement ends. Meet it, and we begin again." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks, and reached for the pen, ready to accept what the numbers alone had never taught her. Life settled into a new rhythm. From my porch, I could see the light flicker on across the hedge each evening, the glow of the house I had built and then chosen to leave. Dinners rotated between our tables, sometimes mine, sometimes theirs, but the difference was clear. No one spoke of contracts anymore, and no one questioned whether I belonged. The children drifted easily between the two homes, laughter carrying across the yard, proof that family bonds could outlast the sharpest words. Lena kept her tone measured, her gestures careful. Evan nodded more than he argued. The weight that once bent my shoulders had lifted, replaced by something firmer, the knowledge that I had drawn a boundary and kept it. I closed my journal one quiet night, set it beside the lamp, and said aloud what Callum would have known all along. Love is not measured by what you pay, it's measured by respect.